The flight attendant's voice sliced through the cabin like a blade, sharp, public, and meant to humiliate. I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security. Passengers looked up from their tablets and champagne flutes, curiosity flashing across their polished faces. In seat 1A, a black woman sat unmoved, her expression calm, composed, almost serene. I've already told you, she said, her voice as smooth as silk, but laced with quiet authority. I'm not moving. Her tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. It carried the weight of someone who knew exactly who she was. What happened next would ripple far beyond this flight, because the woman they tried to humiliate in silence was about to reveal the one truth that would shatter the illusion of control on board. She owned the damn plane. Her name was Zahara Ellis, and to most eyes that afternoon, she looked like a quiet professional flying business for work. Unassuming, elegant, but nothing flashy. Dressed in a soft gray sweater, black trousers and flats, she blended into the polished backdrop of the private terminal with the ease of someone used to moving through high-end spaces without needing to announce herself. At 42, Zahara had long since learned the power of silence and observation. She wasn't flying for leisure. She was en route to Paris for a high-level board meeting that would finalize her latest acquisition, a European aerospace tech firm. Her assistant had offered to book a separate corporate jet, but Zahara preferred to fly commercial when she could, even in luxury, less spectacle, more control. She carried one bag, a slim leather duffel with no logos, and wore no jewelry except for a simple gold watch. She didn't expect special treatment, but she did expect respect. As she stepped into the first-class cabin of the flight she privately funded through her holding company, she scanned the room the way a builder scans blueprints, not with ego, but with clarity. No one recognized her, and that was just the way she liked it, at least for now. Melinda Case had been working airline cabins for over 16 years, and she wore her seniority like a badge of honor, or maybe like armor. She moved with the rigid grace of someone who prided herself on professionalism, though her version of it often blurred with control. Her uniform was spotless, every hair pinned back into a severe twist, her expression set just shy of polite. Melinda liked order. She liked knowing who belonged where and how they were supposed to act once seated, and she especially liked knowing that people would fall in line when she spoke. That's why when Zahara boarded and headed towards seat 1A, without eyeing her for approval or offering the usual first-class deference, Melinda's radar twitched. She clocked the flat shoes, the lack of visible branding, and the calm self-assurance that didn't ask permission. Something about it irritated her. She greeted other passengers with a rehearsed warmth. Welcome back, Mr. Halbrook. Enjoy your flight, Miss Carmichael. But when Zahara approached, all she offered was a dry, hello. No smile, no nod, just an invisible line drawn in the air. To Melinda, people who belonged in first class looked the part, and Zahara didn't. That was all it took to trigger the slow fuse. From the moment the plane took off, Melinda made it clear that Zahara's presence unsettled her. It wasn't loud or obvious, not at first. It was in the way she skipped over Zahara during the pre-departure drink service, offering champagne and cocktails to every other passenger in the row, but never so much as making eye contact with seat 1A. When Zahara politely asked for water, Melinda responded with a clipped, in a moment, and then never returned. She hovered by the more familiar faces, white, well-dressed regulars, chatting about wine pairings and weekend trips to Nantucket, her voice laced with warmth that never once reached Zahara. And still Zahara said nothing. She sat quietly, reading on her tablet, her legs crossed, posture relaxed but composed. But the calm only seemed to provoke Melinda further. She passed by again, this time pushing the cart, and accidentally bumped Zahara's arm without apology. Then came the whispering, Melinda speaking low to a junior attendant, casting occasional glances back toward Zahara. It wasn't hard to guess the topic. A nearby passenger, catching the tension, leaned slightly to see what was going on. And when Zahara shifted her foot slightly into the aisle to adjust her position, Melinda seized the moment. She walked by quickly, clipped the edge of Zahara's foot, and dropped a full glass of sparkling water into her lap. The crash was loud enough to silence nearby conversations. Gasps rippled down the cabin. Melinda recoiled with mock surprise. "Watch where you put your feet," she snapped, loud enough for the entire row to hear. Water soaked through Zahara's slacks, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly met Melinda's eyes and said, "You walked into me." Her tone was still level, still quiet, but it carried an undeniable edge. "All I've asked is to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." That line landed hard. The businessman across the aisle sat up straighter. A woman 2 rows behind leaned forward, suddenly alert. The balance of the cabin shifted, just slightly, but enough for Melinda to feel it. Zahara sat in silence, her slacks still damp from the spilled water, her gaze steady on the seat back in front of her, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the incident not with emotion, but with calculation. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly targeted in a space she had every right to occupy. But this time was different. This time, she had receipts. Her phone, tucked into the side pocket of her bag, had captured enough audio, time-stamped photos, her own notes logged with precision. Every move Melinda made had been documented. Zahara had built her empire on systems and discipline. She knew how to handle conflict, but she also knew when to let people dig their own graves. Across the aisle, a few passengers were still murmuring, casting glances toward her. One of them, a middle-aged man in a navy blazer, looked at her not with pity, but with a flicker of recognition. He studied her face like he was trying to place it. That wasn't new either. Zahara was rarely in the press directly, but her name had circled the business world enough times. Venture capital, healthcare technology, clean energy initiatives. She was the kind of billionaire who didn't flaunt it, but whose influence could close deals with a single phone call. And while Melinda strutted the aisle with the brittle confidence of someone who thought her authority was absolute, Zahara sat there thinking about optics, leverage, and timing. The right move wasn't to shout or demand. It was to wait, let the discomfort grow, let the cabin feel the tension shift. Because power, real power, didn't announce itself, it just arrived. As Zahara leaned back in her seat, she caught the young flight attendant, Jules, watching her from the galley. Their eyes met. Jules looked away quickly, guilt written across her face. Good, Zahara thought. Someone else had noticed. She didn't need the whole plane on her side. Just the truth, and the right moment to reveal it. It happened fast, but not by accident. Melinda returned to Zahara's row with a tray of beverages, her smile polished for the older couple beside her, and coldly absent as she approached seat 1A. Zahara had requested water again, calmly, clearly, giving Melinda the benefit of the doubt. But as Melinda handed drinks across the aisle, she slipped. The tray tilted, and this time, the contents, a full glass of red wine, splashed squarely across Zahara's chest and lap. The liquid bled into her blouse, her trousers, staining the soft gray fabric like a slow-moving bruise. Gasps rippled through the cabin. One woman covered her mouth. A man 3 rows up actually stood to see what happened. Melinda recoiled with exaggerated shock. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice high-pitched and theatrical. "You really should be more careful with your posture." Zahara looked down at herself, then back at Melinda. Her expression was unreadable. "You spilled it on me," she said, her voice low but deadly clear. "You walked straight into me again." Melinda bristled. "Ma'am, you've been difficult since you boarded. If you're going to continue disrupting service, I'll have to ask the captain to get involved." Zahara slowly stood, the soaked fabric clinging to her as she reached into her bag and pulled out a cloth napkin. Not to dry herself, but to set it delicately on her seat. "You're going to want to be very careful with what you say next," she replied. Her tone didn't rise, but the room felt it. A shift, subtle but seismic. Melinda laughed awkwardly. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Zahara said. "I'm warning you, because you're 2 minutes away from losing your job." Melinda turned flustered, gesturing wildly to the junior flight attendant. "Jules, please escort her to the rear cabin. She's interfering with our duties." But Jules didn't move. Her face was pale. She was staring at something. No, someone, walking down the aisle. The pilot. He approached with brisk authority, stopping just short of the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, scanning the faces. Zahara didn't answer. She didn't need to. The wine, the tray, the silence of the stunned passengers said enough. Melinda opened her mouth to speak, but the captain raised a hand. "Miss Ellis," he said quietly, "we just received confirmation from the board." He turned to Melinda. "Step aside. Immediately." Melinda froze. "Excuse me." The captain's voice didn't waver. "You've been serving the owner of the airline, and you just assaulted her." The entire first-class cabin was suspended in stunned silence, the weight of the captain's words crashing over every passenger like turbulence with no warning. Melinda stood frozen, her posture stiff but unraveling, her face drained of color as the realization started to settle into her bones. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but nothing came out. No excuse, no justification, not even the performance of professionalism she had leaned on for years. Zahara didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence held more command than any speech. She calmly took her seat again, dabbed at the stain on her blouse, and glanced down at her phone. One tap. A soft buzz confirmed her assistant had already activated the escalation protocol. Press contacts were being notified, and internal HR logs were already populating. She had planned for scenarios like this, not because she expected to be disrespected, but because she'd lived long enough to know it happened anyway, even to women like her, especially to women like her. Across the aisle, the businessman, who had been quietly watching, gave a slow nod, now recognizing her face from a business magazine spread about powerful women in tech. 2 rows back, the socialite who had earlier whispered a snide comment about first-class standards now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Meanwhile, Jules stood completely still near the galley, her hands folded in front of her, gaze low. The weight of her own silence was beginning to suffocate her. The pilot cleared his throat and turned to Melinda again. "You'll wait in the staff quarters until we land. Security will meet us on the tarmac." Melinda's mouth twitched as if she still didn't fully believe this was happening. But the pilot's tone made it clear. This was no longer a conversation. As she finally turned and walked past Zahara, her eyes flicked toward her one last time, filled with something between panic and disbelief. Zahara didn't even glance up. The moment had passed. The power had shifted. And for the first time since she boarded, the energy in the cabin had completely changed. Whispers turned to apologies. Avoidance turned to stares. Every passenger, every crew member, now understood one thing with complete clarity. The woman they tried to dismiss wasn't just another passenger. She was the one who wrote the checks. The cabin door had barely opened on the runway when a black SUV pulled up beside the aircraft, sleek and silent, flanked by 2 uniformed staff who moved with the precision of trained aides. They ascended the stairs swiftly, carrying a leather portfolio and a tablet. The moment they stepped into the cabin, they didn't ask for directions. Their eyes went straight to Zahara. "Miss Ellis," one of them said with quiet reverence, "your statements have been received and legal is on standby. Would you prefer to speak with the executive committee before or after the scheduled press engagement?" The murmurs throughout the cabin swelled into audible shock. The socialite gasped. The businessman let out a low whistle. Melinda, now seated near the rear galley under the pilot's orders, visibly flinched. One of the aides turned to the captain. "Thank you for stabilizing the situation. You may proceed with deplaning procedures after Ms. Ellis disembarks." Zahara stood calmly, smoothing her blouse with deliberate grace, and nodded. "We'll speak after the flight. Have the PR draft cleaned up and aligned with the accountability directive." She stepped into the aisle, and this time, no one avoided her gaze. Passengers, who had said nothing before, now looked her way with a strange blend of guilt and awe. Jules, standing near the cockpit door, whispered, "I'm sorry," as Zahara passed. Zahara paused just long enough to offer a small, cool smile. Better late than never. And then she was gone, escorted down the stairs like the powerhouse she had always been. Outside, the media had already gathered. Someone on the ground crew must have tipped them. Flashes went off. Cameras rolled. But Zahara didn't stop. She got into the SUV, closed the door behind her, and disappeared into the tinted calm. The passengers behind her sat in silence, still strapped in, the memory of her presence now impossible to forget. Back inside the cabin, the mood had shifted entirely. Melinda remained in the galley, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring blankly at the floor as whispers rippled down the rows. She was no longer in control, no longer the voice of authority. The passengers who once turned a blind eye to her tone now couldn't look away from her fall. The businessman across the aisle tapped a message into his phone. Never underestimate quiet power. Just watched a billionaire get mistreated mid-flight. Heads will roll. And they did. Before the plane had even finished taxiing, a corporate email was already circulating from Zahara's legal team to the airline's executive board, outlining a full internal review, staff retraining mandates, and the immediate dismissal of Melinda Case for misconduct and physical aggression. It wasn't just a pink slip. It was a public statement. Her name would be listed internally as permanently disqualified from all affiliated carriers, and the incident would be used in future training as a case study in what not to do. Jules, the junior attendant, was offered a one-on-one meeting with HR, not for discipline, but to support her for stepping back from a wrongful order. Even the passengers received follow-up emails from the airline within 24 hours, acknowledging the situation and offering full refunds for the flight, as a gesture of accountability and respect for your experience on board. But the real punishment for Melinda wasn't what came from above. It was what she felt in the silence of her peers, in the empty stares from the passengers who once smiled at her, and in the knowledge that her pride, her unchecked assumptions, had brought everything crashing down. The next morning, a video taken by a passenger had already gone viral. The caption read, "Flight attendant slaps billionaire without knowing she owns the plane. Watch her face when she finds out." 10 million views by noon. Melinda didn't just lose her job. She became a cautionary tale. In the quiet of her corner office the next day, Zahara Ellis sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, a cup of black coffee cooling in her hand as the city hummed below. The media frenzy was still unfolding, her inbox filled with interview requests, op-eds, praise, and apologies. But she wasn't focused on any of it. She was watching the sky, watching another plane slice through the morning haze, thinking about how something as vast as air travel could still feel so small when power was abused. Her assistant entered quietly, tablet in hand. "Your statement's been finalized. It highlights the need for procedural reform and racial bias training, just as you requested." Zahara nodded, her voice calm. "Make sure it doesn't read like PR fluff. I want it personal. I want it real." She leaned back slightly, letting her mind drift. Not to the slap, not to Melinda's face when the pilot delivered the news, but to the moment she chose not to shout, not to retaliate, but to let the system carry her voice. That was always the hardest part. Not proving she belonged, but deciding how she'd respond when the world tried to tell her she didn't. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jules, the young attendant. "Thank you for not staying silent. I won't either." Zahara smiled faintly. She didn't need a headline or a podium to know she'd made the right call. This wasn't just about one flight, one woman, one mistake. It was about reminding people that respect wasn't negotiable. That authority didn't always wear a uniform. That silence could be louder than rage. And as she turned back to her desk, the message she wanted to leave the world with was already forming. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is to sit still while the world realizes who you really are. Respect isn't a courtesy, it's a standard. In a world where too many people judge worth by clothes, skin color, or silence, stories like Zahara's are a reminder that the most powerful person in the room might be the one you're trying to ignore. Authority doesn't always look like a badge or a name tag. Sometimes it's a woman in a quiet seat, letting her dignity speak while others unravel around her. Moments like these aren't just about justice. They're about reckoning. They remind us that character is revealed when no one's watching, and even more when everyone is. So the next time you catch yourself making a snap judgment, ask, what if I'm the one being watched? What if the person you think is beneath you is actually 3 steps ahead? What if the person you mistreat today writes the policies that decide your tomorrow? This isn't just a story, it's a warning, a mirror, a lesson. Because power isn't in how loud you speak. It's in what happens after you've said nothing at all. And if you believe in stories that speak truth, in justice that doesn't need to scream, and in quiet strength that can shake the world, Don't scroll past. Subscribe to X Daily Stories for more real-world narratives that challenge, inspire, and remind us all that the way we treat people, especially when we think no one is watching, says everything. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in a seat 1A, holding more power than you'll ever see coming.